This is the Big O Show. This is the Big O Show.
What's up, everybody? Happy Wednesday to you. Clay Ferraro here, Ira Winderman there, and we're going to talk about the 2022 NBA champion, Miami Heat. I think that's the one thing we could take away definitively from Monday's preseason win over the Atlanta Hawks. And I know Ira Winderman agrees on that.
Well, yeah, I mean, when you're looking at the preseason openers, we're running our power rankings after one game of the 2021 preseason, perhaps. And you know what, Clay? And you know this. There will be games when Erik Spoelstra plays nobody. They have an upcoming back-to-back set. I'm about to leave for Houston, playing Houston Thursday, San Antonio Friday. As much as there was a 125-99 win one night, there will be a 30-point loss another night, and you will not be able to name a single player who is on the court for the Heat. A lot of this is done, and I spoke to Erik Spoelstra about this, and the Heat were candid. They had planned some exhibition games last season. There was only a 2-game preseason. They had to hustle up after the bubble in Orlando, so they owed some teams some games. So they're going to Houston. They're going to San Antonio. They're going to Atlanta. I don't think the choice would have been 6 preseason games, but they have to fill a schedule. So there will be some games that probably will be closer to Summer League than they are to what we'll see during the regular season. But clearly the Heat wanted to make an opening statement in front of their home fans on Monday, and I think they very much did that.
That's really good information, by the way, Ira. I did not know that about having to fulfill some contractual obligations on the preseason stuff. By the way, guys, we like to keep this interactive. Make sure to drop any questions in the comments section here. We'll be glad to get to them along the way. Some things that maybe you saw on Monday night that you'd like to get Ira's opinion about. And make sure to smash the like button for us. That does us a big favor as we go along here. So we're going to start this off. Look, it was a lot of fun. I think, it was kind of a mentioned this, but after such a down football weekend and soccer weekend, pretty much everything going wrong, it was nice to see what I think we were hoping to see out of the Miami Heat. But I do want to look at this and say, was this a bit overstated? Some of the positives, because there weren't really any negatives to take out of that game. So we're going to play a little game that we're going to call Mark It Down or Slow It Down. And we're going to hit a few topics along the way here. The first topic that I wrote down: Kyle Lowry will unlock all NBA BAM. Mark it down or slow it down?
That's really interesting, Clay, because the game started, and if you remember the Heat's first basket, it was a Bam mid-range jumper about from the elbow, took it in rhythm, made it in rhythm, and you're like, yeah, that's what we want to see from Bam Adebayo. Every one of his remaining baskets was a dunk, which is not a low percentage play, so I'm fine with that also. But I do wonder the Bam, and you and I have been doing this now, for a couple of months. And from the text line there, everyone's clamoring, Bam needs to shoot more outside shots. Bam needs to shoot more threes. And your point there is such a good one for this reason. What if Kyle Lowry can get Bam nothing but layups? What if he can create the most efficient Bam? So I think it's really interesting for Heat fans to take a step backwards and maybe say, maybe you don't need those Bam threes. Maybe you don't need those Bam jumpers. Maybe Bam runs the court, probably ahead of Jimmy Butler, scores in transition, straight line drives, things like that. Maybe he gets set up on a pick and roll, slipping screens, things like that. So I think the Bam that people wanted to see in the offseason to take that next step might be a little different Bam. And it's interesting, and I'd love for you to sort of react to this in the comments section also here on our YouTube feed, and it's this. Are Heat fans going to be disappointed if Bam finds a way to give you 20, 10, and 5 and not make jump shots and not space the floor, but be efficient? So I think Kyle Lowry is a different kind of key for Bam Adebayo, sort of a cheat code that he'll get him the best possible shots. I think, Clay, you would agree, Bam's best possible shot is not a 3, is not a mid-range jumper, is dunking the freaking ball when your success rate is about 100% or so. So I think it's interesting. I think Kyle Lowry can make Bam a highly efficient player. I don't know if he'll make Bam necessarily a 5-tool player, but hey, it's just like we're seeing with the Dolphins. If you have a quarterback, everyone else looks better. If you have a quarterback on the floor at point guard, everyone looks better. So to your point, it was real. It was spectacular. And yes, and that's what having a point guard means.
I love the Seinfeld reference, by the way. Yes, and I'm going to mark it down. And maybe not necessarily making the All-NBA team, because as we saw with those NBA.com GM polls that we're going to talk about coming up a little bit later in the show, positional stuff kind of muddies the water when it comes to All-NBA team. Is Bam a center? Is he a power forward? Where are you going to put him? But I do think what we saw in that game, to your point, was Kyle Lowry is going to be the quarterback that leads his receiver by a full yard and allows him to get the momentum going, to get the yards after catch. Whereas maybe you had point guards in the past, quarterbacks in the past, that would get them the ball, a half a yard ahead to where you catch it and you fall forward for 2 or 3 extra yards. Kyle Lowry's the guy that's going to get you the extra 20 to 25 in yak. And so I think unlocking Bam is not going to be, to your point, finding him for the open mid-range shots, which Bam had no problem getting open mid-range looks. Like teams were giving him those looks. It's where do you get him the ball where he is most comfortable? And Ira, I think the thing that was most telling to me heading into the season, and something that kind of made me raise my eyebrow a little bit, and what I was looking for, was Bam putting on the extra size, Bam putting on the extra weight. That's not necessarily something you do if you're planning on just standing out and hitting mid-range jumpers. Now, obviously, a lot of that is you want to go inside, you want to be able to battle for rebounds, you want to be able to block shots and take the pounding there. But it's also somebody who's planning on being around the rim a bit more. So yes, I'm marking that one down. If you want to take one thing from that game that I'm willing to take the overreaction on, it's seeing Kyle Lowry up close doing what he was able to do. I'm all in now. And by the way, the NBA GMs in that poll said the same thing about
Clay,
Lowry's impact.
One other point there, and here's sort of like the conundrum. You have a playmaking point guard who makes first, who reads the floor, who's been in this game for 16 years and knows how to do it. Here's the issue. He's also 35. He's going to miss time. That's logical. There's going to be injuries. I think the positional talent gap at point guard between number 1 and number 2 is as large, arguably larger than any other position on the roster. In other words, from Bam Adebayo to Dwayne Dedmon, from PJ Tucker to Markieff Morris. You go down the road there from Jimmy Butler to Tyler Herro as we move across. So I think it's interesting when you have someone who is maybe almost sublime at what he does, and then no offense, but he's young, and you go to Gabe Vincent, or you go to point guard X who's not there yet. So I think until, again, this you and I every week go on this subject, until Victor Oladipo comes back, that's going to be interesting, because I think there's going to be one way to play when Kyle's on the court. Can't overplay him, can't play him more than 36 minutes, probably not even that, closer to 30. So it's funny because your strength of your team is also a concern for the non-Lowry minutes. You and I talk about a lot of times the non-Butler minutes, the non-Bam minutes. How do you sort of survive those? It's going to be very interesting. I really do wonder, will a style of play be the same when Kyle's not on the floor? What I know is I highly doubt the efficiency will be the same when Kyle's not on the floor.
So getting to some of the comments here, Game Over says, I'll be happy if the Heat win. I don't care about Bam's stats other than that. Daniel Grafton disagrees, though, says, I think it'll be dissatisfying because we know that Bam has the ability. Do you force an outdoor cat to live inside, or do you force an indoor cat to be free and have no limitations? Lowry is temporary. Bam is the future. I think what I would say is that, do we know that Bam has that consistent ability to hit the mid-range and to hit the three-point shot? Because we haven't seen it. So to me, I agree with your point about forcing an indoor cat outdoors and vice versa. But I think the key point is, what is Bam most comfortable doing? And yeah, maybe down the line, you allow him to kind of grow that offensive game if, like Chris Bosh did later on in his career when he was at the Big Three and at best benefited the Heat. But to Ira's point, if you can get him dunks, and if Kyle Lowry is
dunks are good.
Dunks are good. You're going to. I don't care. I know this new age analytical thing that 3-pointers are better than 2-pointers and all that. I've never bought into any shot is better than the dunk.
Than 100% shot. That you can give me all the percentage you want, and I know what people are saying. You shoot 33% on threes, 50% on twos is fine. But if you shoot 100% on dunks, that's a pretty darn efficient shot. And again, the new analytics is not just threes. It's threes and at the rim. nothing in between. So Bam, that mid-range game, maybe you do sacrifice his potential there to get him dunks at the rim. Now, also, Clay, again, preseason game. Who wasn't playing for the Hawks? Clint Capella.
Yeah.
They didn't have any of their top centers there. You had Jahlil Okafor running around with his head cut off, likely to be cut. Our guy who had to force into the action there, Georgie Dang, started at center. So let's have some perspective. You know, what Bam Adebayo showed on Monday is that he can dunk against summer league competition. So let's step back a little. Rockets really don't have much in the middle either. Probably not even the Spurs, but it'll come around. There'll be a real game against a real Clint Capella. Then we'll have a far better read. You have to have perspective on Monday that way also. The Hawks, even though the Heat were without Jimmy Butler, the Hawks were basically without their power rotation.
That's a great point. And I was less focused on what Bam did, even though that was kind of the tone of the question, than I was what Kyle Lowry did for Bam and kind of leading guys into the right spots. All right, next topic on this. Mark it down or slow it down. Tyler Herro is going to win Sixth Man of the Year.
I knew you were going to come strong with Tyler. It's hard not to, Clay, when you got a guy who scored 26 points in 26 minutes. I think he has a chance. I think he has a chance because what he does is so dynamic. Because what he does stands out. Because for weeks, you know, when we've been doing Pallet Rock City Inside the Paint, we've been talking about the comparisons to the Jamal Crawfords and the Lou Williams and the microwave type of ability. And we wanted to see that because that, you know, you have to fill boxes here. And as much as you're saying who are your starters going to be, how's your rotations going to be, there is a very real NBA realm and role of streak scorer. And that's something I think Tyler can do very well. 14 consecutive points at the end of the first quarter, that microwave ability, sort of what the Heat thought, let's be honest, they had in Dion Waiters previously and did at times. But I would say this to Heat Nation. If you want Tyler to be that player, if you want him to microwave, if you want streak scoring, please, when we come on here every Wednesday for Pallet Rack City Inside the Paint, don't complain when there is a 2 of 12, when there is a 3 of 13. Because you know what? Part of that role is keep shooting until you get pulled out of the game. That's part of the mentality also. I think Tyler can do that. I think Tyler will do that. And Clay, how fascinating. Even you and I sort of built an off-season of shows on who they're going to get for Tyler Herro when they trade him. And it's just crazy how the entire sort of thought process change and narrative changes after one game to Tyler Herro invaluable. But my question to you would be this, Clay. If Tyler Herro is not your streak scorer, maybe you trade him, maybe he's not that role. Tell me one other player on this roster who you think can be microwave. In other words, God bless him, but Tyler Herro is going to miss 3 games for injury X. That, you know, we were talking about filling roles and next man up and things like that. Give me a name on this roster. When Tyler Herro has to miss 3 games because of a sore hamstring, who on this roster fills that role?
Well, there's not, based on body of work in the NBA. The one player that you hear over and over again that has shown that ability when given the opportunity elsewhere is Gabe Vincent. That his true strength is the ability to put the ball in the basket. That, you know, it's like they were trying to make him a point guard, but that he's more of like but no, to your point, he's
not an attack guard, right? Clay, he's not an attack guard. Max Strus is not an attack forward.
I agree.
And like Tyler said, he also got 5 free throws, which might not seem like a ton when you've covered Jimmy Butler for a couple of years, but you get that also. You stop the game. You might stop the other team's run by getting to the line.
Right.
So it's just weird. Everyone was trading Tyler Herro in the offseason, trading him for a point guard, trading him for a power forward. And yet when you look at the role he fills right now, and if he's not there, it really increases what's on the plate for Kyle Lowry. It really increases what's on the plate for Jimmy Butler. So it's kind of interesting. None of the kids they have in camp, Marcus Garrett, defensive-oriented. Caleb Martin, nice, steady type of player, but not a burst kind of player.
Right.
So it just, you know, there are options out there. Some teams have an excess, and that's something to look at. But I think that's the one thing the Heat sort of don't have is, okay, the starters are gassed. They're all out 8 minutes into the game. Who's coming off the bench to keep you afloat? The Heat ran their offense through Tyler Herro at that point Monday. It's just interesting. I know I shouldn't be as worried about the depth because you got to get the first thing first, the main thing. But it is interesting that I don't see another guy like that, even though the Heat currently are carrying 20 players on their roster.
So that goes back to your point about what's the drop off, when you're talking about if Kyle Lowry has to go out and the drop off between Tyler Herro and the next microwave guy. So I'm looking back, Ira, because I intentionally phrased this as sixth man of the year, because the sixth man of the year historically over the last decade or so, and maybe even going back before that, it's the guy who's going to be that microwave guy. These are the names that I think if you're a Heat fan, you're hoping Tyler Herro becomes one of these types of players. Lou Williams won it 3 times. You mentioned Jamal Crawford. Eric Gordon, perfect example of somebody on that 2017 Rockets team that came in and did just that. Now, Montrezl Harrell, a little bit different type of player, obviously, but he did score a lot off the bench on that Clippers team. And then Jordan Clarkson last year. And the thing that I think,
like that.
I think that the thing that all these guys have in common, Ira, you look down the line here, these are winning teams. These are teams that had one of the higher seeds in the conference, and obviously not as much playoff success. But I think the bottom line here is you need somebody like a Tyler Herro to come in and get buckets against the other team's second-team guards in order to fill the stat sheet and keep you scoring when your guys are on the bench. All right, we only got 2 more minutes here, so maybe we attack this a little bit more in the next break. But the next topic that I wanted to get was the one in your Ask Ira column. Mark it down or slow it down. Heat at light speed, playing with pace once Jimmy Butler is back.
I've seen this act too many times, even the last few seasons. Clay, remember how they always start the season really high scoring and really high on turnovers? And Eric Spoelstra says we have to simplify it. We might have to slow it down. I just don't see that changing. It's not their DNA. It's not the DNA of this roster to run around with your head cut off. When Eric Spoelstra tells us, hey, we're going to outscore the other team, screw the defense, then I'll buy all in on this. But you know what? Pace also plays to your defense as far as getting back on defense, not always playing in transition. The Heat don't like to play that way. So I would say is this. There will be select times where the pitch ahead is there and they will play that way. But Jimmy Butler's a half-court player and arguably one of the best half-court players in the NBA, including getting to the foul line, slowing the game down a little. So again, I want to see the Kyle-Jimmy combination. I want to see what they want. I want to see if Kyle pitches ahead to Jimmy, and then Jimmy dribbles the ball back up to the top of the circle, throws it to Kyle and says, let's go run pick and roll, pick and roll, pick and roll. So I really am curious about that. I just do not see the Heat playing at breakneck speed. I don't see them playing like the Sacramento Kings or these other teams who have to play that way and create chaos because they don't have depth of talent. Jimmy is very good in the half court. Bam is very good in the half court, facilitating and setting his screens. Duncan Robinson is outstanding in the half court, moving without the ball. I don't know if you remove that from your equation. Pace is fun. Speed is fun. Scoring is fun. Winning is more fun. I think that's what Eric Spoelstra would tell you.
And I think this is going to get back to what we talked about right at the outset here, that Kyle Lowry is going to do what's best for the team and also getting guys in spots. And, in hockey, they call it odd man rushes. It's not just that everybody is coming down at breakneck speed. I could see scenarios where you've got Kyle Lowry and a couple of other guys who are out running while Jimmy's like, you know what, I'm going to take my rest on offense and sit back. So, yeah, I think you're going to see levels to this whole thing as the season goes on.
And the hockey analogy there I would make is Wayne Gretzky operating in the office behind the goal line in the back of the goal. I think that's what Kyle Lowry could do also, orchestrating. I think he's an orchestrator also. So I think there'll be a yin and a yang between that. There will be some pace. There will be some running. But if you're asking me which is more likely, the Heat to be in the top 10 of defense or the top 10 of offense, I'll go with defense every time. And I know that Eric Spoelstra would.
Coming up next, right here on Inside the Paint, do NBA GMs like the Heat more than you do? We'll get into that. Plus, what's going on around the league and could it affect the top of the Eastern Conference with this whole vaccination stuff? That's coming up right here on Inside the Paint.
You're listening to the Pallet Rack City Inside the Paint Show. Pallet Rack City in Hialeah is the company you need when you want your warehouse sporting the finest racks in the business. After all, who doesn't love a good rack? Pallet Rack City. Sports fans love a place with great food, cold drinks, and TVs everywhere. That's why sports fans love Sports Grill and their 7 amazing locations. Check out the Bird Road location at 11481 Southwest 40th Street in the back corner of the West Bird Shopping Center. Sports Grill is also now offering some great employment opportunities. All kinds of positions are now available from kitchen to hosting. Call for more information at 305-485-8845. From wraps to salads to amazingly delicious specialty dishes, Sports Grill is the home to the legendary special grilled wings. Since 1987, Sports Grill, good food, good drink, and good friends.
This is the Big O Show. 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 This is the Big O Show.
There's no need to drive around South Florida wasting valuable time looking for a new or certified pre-owned Acura. Go to the #1 volume sales dealership in the Southeast United States. Craig Zinn's Acura of Pembroke Pines. Purchase with pace and space in a dealership tailored to your needs. From home buying to providing that personal touch. Contact the 2020 Satisfaction Award winner Craig Zinn's Acura of Pembroke Pines. 888-776-5123. That's 888-776-5123. Or visit them at 15601 Pines Boulevard in Pembroke Pines.
When you need your warehouse looking good while staying efficient, there's only one place to find the finest racks in the business. Pallet Rack City in Hialeah. 305-424-8547. That's 305-424-8547. Pallet Rack City is the company you need when you want your warehouse sporting the finest racks in the business. After all, who doesn't love a great rack? Pallet Rack City. 305-424-8547. That's 305-424-8547. If it's hardcore hoops you desire, make sure you subscribe to the Big O Radio Show and never miss an episode of Inside the Paint. Let's get back to the Pallet Rack City Inside the Paint Show with Ira Winderman and Clay Ferraro.
Welcome back to Inside the Paint. Make sure to smash the like button. That helps us out a lot as we go along here. Some of the chat questions here. This is a good one from Daniel. Pace doesn't work well for a defensive-minded team, correct? And in many ways, like if you want to take all-encompassing, yes. However, bottom line is if you're scoring, that helps your defense because then you can get back, you can set your defense. So this is where playing with pace really works well when you've got a point guard like Kyle Lowry who is so smart and knows when to pick his spots and play with space. You don't just run around willy-nilly. Yes, I'm 94 years old.
It's the helter-skelter of the bottom teams in the league where they're constantly pushing the ball. They don't care about the turnovers. The Heat got caught in that a little bit in recent seasons, also trying Tyler Herro at point guard last season to start the season. So it's more controlled pace. There still could be plenty of fun plays and alley-oops along the way. But you know what, Clay? The game slows in the fourth quarter, and the game's always slow in the playoffs. So, we go back for years, and Mike D'Antoni in 7 seconds or less in Phoenix, and how that's going to win a championship, but it didn't. And we saw his 3-for-all. He just posted a story about PJ Tucker at sunsentinel.com, and how he was going to shoot threes nonstop in Houston, but it didn't win a championship. You know, you probably have to go back to the Showtime Lakers for a team that got, even for all the Warriors scoring, probably have to go back to the Showtime Lakers for a team that had that, sort of MO, championship MO, but it was a different league then. It was different rules then. It was different players. It was a different approach. So it's fun. So I think what Heat fans have to decide is they would rather have fun or rather win. I'll take you to a quick story here. Kevin Lockery, after he was replaced as coach first by Alvin Gentry and then Pat Riley, worked a bunch of games for ESPN Radio. And he'd always come up to me watching the new look Heat. Remember when Pat first got here, they were scoring in the 80s, Clay. They were barely scoring.
Oh, yeah.
And he'd go to me, how can you watch this? Remember, Kevin was coach of the ABA, New York Nets. They had Julius Irving and some scorers. He goes, how can you watch this? And I was like, yeah, but they're winning. And people will put up with a small amount of points for a large amount of victories. And I think that's the trade-off you're going to make. It's like, how many times have we heard Eric Spoelstra say this during the good times? We won that game in the mud. They still would prefer to win. So I think they'll take a little more mud and a little less pizzazz, but I still think there could be some fun moments overall. I do think this, when Clay Ferraro comes on Local 10 for the 11 o'clock news, he will have highlights to show of the Heat this year that will be dramatic. They might not tell the story of the whole game, but Clay, I do think this team, I think you would agree, will give you 3 or 4 plays every night where you won't have any trouble pulling that package together.
Yeah, you're going to get out and you're going to run when the game dictates it. It's just not that you're going to do it like the helter-skelter pace, like you said. Comment here from Game Over: who has fun when their team isn't winning? Exactly, and that's bottom teams in the league. You can see teams like the Timberwolves, the Rockets, that can run like crazy all the time. But if you're not winning the ball game, then, who cares? I mean, bottom line, especially if you're a Heat fan, you want to win. To that point about Lowry, I really liked, and I love when the NBA does this every year on NBA.com. They survey front office people around the NBA and get their take on the upcoming season. They get their take on each team. I found it interesting. They had the Heat as the 3rd best team in the East. And one of the biggest reasons why was they feel like these anonymous executives feel like Kyle Lowry is going to raise the talent level on this team. That not that he's going to make, like, everybody's all of a sudden magically going to be a better individual player, but that Kyle Lowry will get the most out of the guys surrounding him. I found that really interesting, that when you canvass the league, that the feeling is that, Happy learned how to putt. That you get in somebody like Kyle Lowry and all of a sudden those guys get that much better, that you raise them to right behind Brooklyn and Milwaukee.
Yeah, there's a couple of things there. They raised the Heat as making the best offseason moves, and they said the best, most impactful offseason addition is Kyle Lowry. It was also a down offseason. This was not the offseason of Anthony Davis and Kawhi Leonard and LeBron, so you have to have some perspective. You could probably say that the biggest moves of the previous 5 years, each of them, Clay, were probably bigger than the biggest move of this relatively quiet NBA offseason. What I found most interesting was, when I was cobbling my story together and going down these categories, is the general managers did not rate a Heat player among the top at any single position.
Not
now,
one.
They just voted for the top. So some of them were no contest, basically. But Bam was not listed among the top centers. Kyle Lowry, for all they said about his acquisition, was not listed among the top 5 point guards, and on throughout the list. So I think, again, they're looking at this Heat team as an ensemble team, like they have been at their best of times, but not to list Jimmy Butler, not to list Bam, not to list Kyle Lowry. And they did list Erik Spoelstra very highly. And I think that puts a lot of pressure on Erik Spoelstra, because each of these pieces has to be placed in the precise right spot to get this work. There's not a lot of margin for errors. There's not going to be Steph Curry coming in and hitting 12 3-pointers. There's not going to be LeBron pounding his chest and saying, I got this. I'll run the offense. You guys go stand over there in the parking lot. If you see Heat box scores that only have 1 or 2 players with significant nights, you're probably going to see a Heat loss. You need to see a nice line for Kyle Lowry, a nice line for Jimmy Butler, a nice line for Bam Adebayo, a nice line in this direction, up and down in 3-pointers for Duncan Robinson. So Heat are going to have good games from a bunch of people, or else I'm going to be writing a bunch of stories of, despite Jimmy Butler's big night, despite Kyle Lowry's triple-double, despite Bam Adebayo's double-double, you're going to have 2 or 3 names in that headline and on those local 10 highlights every night.
Now, I will say this: when you get into the playoffs and you've got the more consistent time in between games and you're able to game plan from one game to the next, Jimmy Butler has already shown that he can be that guy in spurts. Yes. And I think having someone like Kyle Lowry to take the pressure off of him in those moments when he doesn't have to do everything, directing the offense, scoring, all of that. I think that's going to help once you get to the playoffs. But when we're talking about the regular season and how you end up getting to the finish line and hopefully getting into one of those top 4 slots, right? And this is what we've talked about, that you want to get to one of the top 4 slots, not just to have home court advantage, but you want to avoid getting into those play-in scenarios. Having somebody like Kyle Lowry is going to make such an enormous difference. And the fact that the NBA GMs viewed that, I thought was big. So, to your point,
if I could just interrupt just for 1 second, though, it's interesting how they put the Heat 3rd. I look at it as sort of apples and oranges, and John Hollinger from The Athletic, when he did his Heat preview, put them 6th. I don't know about the regular season. In other words, I think the GMs were saying the Heat's the 3rd best team, including regular season and playoffs. I think the Heat are very much built for the playoffs.
Completely agree.
But I'm not sure about the regular season. I'm not so sure that a hungry team like the Hawks, and look, we saw some of their depth on Monday, but they didn't even play a lot of their young players. Now with DeAndre Hunter, if he's back, if Cam Reddish can contribute. So I think it's going to be somewhat of a struggle to get top 4 for the Heat in the East. And really, even with the Boston and Horford and Dennis Schroeder, I need to see how this depth plays out, how Riley plays people, how the fit comes in. I think 3 is a little high when they had the Heat in the East there overall. I think the Heat could be one of the 3 best teams going into the playoffs or in the playoff situation. They're built for that. But you know what? No matter what you do in late April, May, and June, you still have to get there in good enough shape. I think it's going to be very interesting. I think Heat fans are going to be very curious as this season goes along. Are the Knicks going to be real? Can they match what they did last season? Are the Hawks real? Can they match what they did winning the division last season? Did Boston, to some degree, get better by adding Horford and by adding Dennis Schroeder? So I think the East is going to be a little bit more complex regular season for the Heat than maybe the playoffs are. And all of that said, very long-winded, by the way, is this. It still comes down to your matchup. Heat had the Bucks in the first round. They were done. The Heat wins one more game. They're hosting the Knicks in the first round. Completely different scenario. So I think the matchups will matter also.
What's up, GP Trap Hewitt? Checking in from Pompano Beach. Make sure to smash that like button, as he says. Thanks a lot, guys. Yeah, and I've said this before in the program, but for those of you who are joining maybe for the first time or haven't heard me say it, I couldn't care less about where the Heat finish in the regular season as long as it's in that top 6 and you're avoiding the playoff. Because if you're in the top 6, you're not playing Milwaukee or Brooklyn in the first round in all likelihood. So at that point, it's about matchups, and I like the Heat's matchup at this point as we sit here heading into not even the regular season game 1. I like the matchups versus any of the rest of those teams. The thing that is a little bit tough as you look back at last year, and it kind of felt like when they went into Boston and blasted them and were able to avoid that play-in game, I think there was kind of this exhale, like, okay, the Heat are back now. Like, they're fine, like going into – and they weren't. So I feel like make sure that you're in good shape heading into that. I want to hit on one thing that you said in these last few minutes about those NBA GM rankings.
Sure.
That there was not a single Heat player listed. I think that on one hand, the Heat would like it that way. Like, they like this feeling that, hey, us against the world, this is how we've thrived in the past. And yet at the same time, if you look at those listings, I think you saw Luka Doncic listed for like 4 different spots. Sure. I think you saw, so I think there's a little bit of, but. So it's not that people don't view the Heat as a talented team. It's not that they don't, if you were to re-poll these GMs and ask them, okay, Luka Doncic has to be listed as a point guard. Jimmy Butler has to be listed as a small forward. Maybe it would be a little bit different.
I get that, except the other point I look at it is this, and I'm not really a money guy unless we're talking about cap, but if Kyle Lowry is your 3-year, $85 million point guard, if Jimmy Butler is now on the books for 5 years at $220 million over those next 5 years, if Bam Adebayo is starting right now, his 5-year, $163 million extension, if Duncan Robinson is on the books at 5 years for $90 million, the Heat are paying those guys like they should be stars. The Heat are paying those guys like they should be elite standalone talent also. The ensemble message is great. But what's going to happen, Clay Ferraro, when we're in year 2 and 3 of Pallet Rack City inside the paint, and you're increasing your family brood there, so there's kids all around you, eventually, is how are the Heat going to round out these players with so many high salaries on the books as well? So I do think there needs to be a degree of individual stardom as well. And I think that's sort of where the question is. When you're paying Kyle that, and you're paying Jimmy that, and you're paying Duncan that, and you're paying Bam that, you're going to have to fill in with much lower salaries along the way. So, yeah, I think to a degree, some of those guys do have to stand out and maybe be just a little bit more.
And that's fine. I think here's my problem with it. And I'm looking specifically at the question, who's the best point guard in the NBA? Here are how they ranked them. Steph Curry, number 1. Damian Lillard, number 2. Luka Doncic, number 3. LeBron James, number 4. And Chris Paul tied with LeBron at 4. Of all those guys, I think the only guy that you would say is a pure point guard in the Kyle Lowry mold is Chris Paul. I mean, the rest of those guys are scorers in many ways first, right? So I just think it's a little different. And I think when you look at this list, you can point it out and say, okay, well, if you're getting Kyle Lowry to be that facilitator, that ultimate quarterback, floor general type point guard, I think you could justify the salary, assuming he's able to stay on the floor, stay healthy.
Right, for at least 60 games. Yeah.
Right. So yeah, I think when you look at the survey, it's a little bit different. Daniel says, when's the next game? Well, Ira's actually going to get on a flight tonight to Houston for tomorrow's game.
Houston,
right?
It's weird scheduling. They have a 10 p.m. game, 9 o'clock in Houston. That's because it's the second game of an ESPN doubleheader, ESPN2. Then they go to San Antonio for an 8:30 game. That'll be a Bally Sports Sun. And you can really tell the networks, Clay, are just trying to fit things in, because a week from Friday, the Heat play a 6:30 p.m. Friday home game against the Boston Celtics exhibition. Why? Because ESPN has Friday night college football, and they want the basketball off the air by 9 p.m. So they're just throwing in whatever they can. Sometimes you don't even finish, like last night, Memphis, when the sprinklers went off. You know, I found it funny. Kevin Harlan was doing the radio for the Monday Night Football game, which was in a rain delay of a dome stadium. He had a red eye. He was complaining, I'm not going to get out of here in time. Goes to Memphis. The sprinklers go off. They wind up having to delay and then finally cancel the end of that game. So I think you need some perspective also. I'll be really curious, Clay, including maybe even you, to see how many people stay up for the full Heat game that starts at 10 o'clock on Thursday from Houston.
Yeah, it all depends on who's playing. If you've got the Summer League roster out there, I'm getting some Z's.
And by the second half, I think it'll only be what you have termed before the Micah Potter hardcore fans. So we will see.
Hey, look, I don't know, man. I'd like to see Omer Yurtseven. I'll tell you the thing that I think bothered me about this list as I'm going back through it again. Who's the best defensive player in the NBA? I mean, Bam Adebayo didn't get a single vote.
Yes, even for interior player or whatever.
Yeah.
Now, again, this is not the kind of poll where they were asked to name their top 5 or top 3. They gave a name, and that was it. So you're not going to get the diversity of names you do with the NBA awards when it's 1, 2, and 3, or in some cases through 5 on the ballot. You're not, if you know, some of the lists ended very quickly on that survey. There was 1 to 2 players on some answers, and that's it. So I wouldn't overstate it. I also think GMs try to show they're the smartest men in the room. So they're like, oh, we can list a player at point guard. We can list him as shooting guard. We can list him as small forward, like you mentioned, and sort of show that they're smarter than the rest of us, that even the NBA on their award ballots wouldn't. Look, it's a fun thing. It's nice that they actually take the time to do it. It's done through the NBA, so you know there's a degree of legitimacy. I still, Clay, prefer that to the top 100 player list that ESPN and Sports Illustrated does, where it's just so opinionated, you know, of random journalists that it just doesn't feel the same. This is fun. Again, it'll play out for real in games that matter starting on February 20th or February 19th. So we'll know soon enough.
I'm just looking at Rudy Gobert at number 2, and I'm sorry, I watched him played off the floor. You could point to him as the reason why the Clippers beat Utah in that deciding game, and it was because of his inability to play defense on the perimeter. I watch Bam Adebayo do that all the time, and I watch him do it very well. They have Giannis number 1 and far and away number 1. I'm fine with that, and yet I don't see an enormous difference defensively between Bam and Giannis. Now Giannis is a ridiculous offensive player, and we saw that his ability to dominate his way. So I'm not saying that Bam is him as a complete player. I just look at the list and I think, look, you can't tell me that one GM watches what Bam Adebayo does against Stephen Curry and some of these guys on the perimeter, in addition to what he does at the rim, and doesn't say, yeah, that's. So anyway, that's the one, and I'm sorry if I'm coming off of as homerish on this one. I like Bam, great guy to be around. So maybe I'm a little bit biased on this one, but that was the one that bothered me more than
well.
else.
If a Bam Adebayo jersey shows up behind you on next week's show, coming from Bam, then we'll know where this all was headed.
True story at Media Day, by the way. I asked him like 2 questions, and all of a sudden, like, he talked for so long that the person who was kind of leading him around looked at me and was like, Time to wrap it up. I'm like, no, man, I want to spend 2 hours with Bam here. All right, coming up next, I want to talk about what's going on at the top of the Eastern Conference, specifically with the Brooklyn Nets. And is there a chance that we may not even see Kyrie Irving for a lot of the games this year? How could that change the compass of the Eastern Conference? That's coming up next right here on Inside the Paint.
You're listening to the Pallet Rack City Inside the Paint Show. Pallet Rack City in Hialeah is the company you need when you want your warehouse sporting the finest racks in the business. After all, who doesn't love a good rack? Pallet Rack City. Sports fans love a place with great food, cold drinks, and TVs everywhere. That's why sports fans love Sports Grill and their 7 amazing locations. Check out the Bird Road location at 11481 Southwest 40th Street in the back corner of the West Bird Shopping Center. Sports Grill is also now offering some great employment opportunities. All kinds of positions are now available, from kitchen to hosting. Call for more information at 305-485-8845. From wraps to salads to amazingly delicious specialty dishes, Sports Grill is the home to the legendary special grilled wings. Since 1987, Sports Grill, good food, good drink, and good friends.
This is the Big O Show. 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 This is the Big O Show.
There's no need to drive around South Florida wasting valuable time looking for a new or certified pre-owned Acura. Go to the #1 volume sales dealership in the Southeast United States. Craig Zinn's Acura of Pembroke Pines. Purchase with pace and space in a dealership tailored to your needs. From home buying to providing that personal touch. Contact the 2020 Satisfaction Award winner Craig Zinn's Acura of Pembroke Pines. 888-776-5123. That's 888-776-5123. Or visit them at 15601 Pines Boulevard in Pembroke Pines.
When you need your warehouse looking good while staying efficient, there's only one place to find the finest racks in the business. Pallet Rack City in Hialeah. 305-424-8547. That's 305-424-8547. Pallet Rack City is the company you need when you want your warehouse sporting the finest racks in the business. After all, who doesn't love a great rack? Pallet Rack City. 305-424-8547. That's 305-424-8547. If it's hardcore hoops you desire, make sure you subscribe to the Big O Radio Show and never miss an episode of Inside the Paint. Let's get back to the Pallet Rack City Inside the Paint Show with Ira Winderman and Clay Ferraro.
Welcome back to Inside the Paint, final segment here. Make sure to drop your questions, any comments you may have in the chat section here on our YouTube channel. And please make sure to, as Big O would say, smash the like button. That does us a big favor. So, we talk about the Miami Heat and how the NBA poll of GMs had them as the third best team in the Eastern Conference, whether that's how they finish in the regular season or how they are heading into the playoffs. But I don't think anybody questions that the top two teams are Brooklyn and Milwaukee, in whatever order that you want to take them. And yet, that is assuming that Kyrie Irving is playing for the Brooklyn Nets. Mm-hmm. At this point, he's not. And there is nothing to say that he is going to anytime soon, at least in certain situations. And this is all stemming from his reluctance to become vaccinated and the rules in New York, which essentially say you got to be. And so, Ira, how do you see this playing out? I think the one thing, whether you agree or disagree with Kyle Lowry's stances both on this and historically speaking, the one thing that is inarguable is that he is convicted on them. He is somebody who is going to stand by his stances. So if he ends up standing by this, I mean, what is the end game here for Brooklyn, and how does that play into the top of the Eastern Conference moving forward?
Well, it's interesting because Brooklyn obviously is limited because he's such a quality player. You want him there because you don't know if those restrictions will remain in place in January, February, March, or playoffs when you need him the most. Kyrie Irving has shown to this point he doesn't mind missing games. Of course, Kyrie Irving has also shown he doesn't mind missing games because he's always gotten paid for all those games. Took a 2-week vacation last season, went unmasked to a party, has walked away saying, the mental strain of the game, sort of a Naomi Osaka thing, needed his time, and every team has been very willing because he's that talented. To me, the Nets equation, I've been thinking about this a lot, Clay, because there's a chance, obviously he doesn't play any home games. That's half the schedule. Can't play at Madison Square Garden, still in New York City. Can't practice at home. Steve Nash said we're not moving our practices back to our Jersey practice facility or something like that. So he's not even going to be in sync with his teammates. So I sort of rethought this. I was going over this last night in my head. Let's take Kyrie Irving out of the Nets equation, okay? What if I were to tell you I have a team in Brooklyn whose top two players are Kevin Durant and James Harden, who have a nice mix of NBA veterans who are also part of that, from the Blake Griffins and the LaMarcus Aldridge and a bunch of other proven players, even some interesting rookies. So, Clay, just for a second, Kyrie Irving doesn't exist, okay? Probably which would meet the goals of half the fans out there. Where would you put this Brooklyn Nets team with James Harden and Kevin Durant and the rest of their veteran quality supporting cast in the Eastern Conference, assuming everyone else is as is?
I think they're still top two, but I think they're a lot closer to the Heat than they would be with a full-time Kyrie Irving. And
See, I think they're I agree. I think they're number two also. Sorry to cut you off there.
No, you're good.
So my point being, they might be number two anyway. You know, it's so interesting. You and I, every week we talk about the Nets and everything going on there. We talk so little about the Bucks, as does the rest of the league. They're defending champions. They have Antetokounmpo. They have Drew Holiday. They have Chris Middleton. They have Bobby Portis came on. They've augmented in the offseason, even losing PJ Tucker. But that's the thing for me with the Nets. So, Clay, just before I interrupt you, and I apologize, my question is this. I wonder how Steve Nash approaches it. Does he approach it like you and I just said? Kyrie's a bonus. If he shows up today, then we all eat lobster. If not, then we just settle for steak and go forward. But I think the Nets are a really good team without Kyrie Irving. I think the fact that they made the switch now, that James Harden basically is the point guard, they have the guy who's going to distribute and run the offense anyway. Of course, you're not as good without an all-star, without an MVP quality player, but they are so stacked. It's almost like saying you have LeBron and Anthony Davis and Russell Westbrook winds up missing 20 games. Well, the Lakers are still pretty damn good. You know, you have that level of quality. It's not like the Warriors when they lost Klay Thompson and they had some neophyte players and Draymond Green. I wouldn't put in that tier. So I think the Nets will be good enough with Harden and Durant if that's the cohesion they develop. But if it's Kyrie in and Kyrie out and Kyrie practice and Kyrie not practice, and it's two different teams, it's almost like they're featuring their A team in some games and their B team in some games. That's a really hard way to play 82 games of NBA basketball.
And so I think the question then becomes, if you're Steve Nash, how much do you want to build a team without Kyrie Irving? And then just hope at the end of the year that you can just supplement the team that you currently have. I think the problem with the Kyrie Irving is that he's somebody who part of his greatness is also his usage. And it's getting him the ball and allowing him to kind of do his thing. Well, that's then going to take the ball out of James Harden's hands. It's going to take the ball out of Kevin Durant's hands. Now, if you've played a full season with doing that, then I think it's a little bit different where you can kind of build that cohesion with those guys. And no, you're not dropping out of the top two by taking Kyrie Irving out of the equation, as long as you're building a cohesive unit with the rest of that talent there. But then what happens at the end of the year? It's not like with the Heat, where adding Victor Oladipo midway through the year as a kind of defensive stopper, like a guy who's going to supplement your defense. But you're not going to be relying as much, hopefully, on Victor Oladipo to dribble the ball around and do kind of what Kyrie Irving would do for Brooklyn. So
yeah, that's a really good, Clay, that's a really good analogy, because what if Victor Oladipo, instead of 4 games, had played 14 and the Heat developed a rhythm?
Right.
And they were going to do this, and Tyler Herro would be there instead, and they had their team, and then boom, he goes out with the quadricep surgery. So you're right, it's different. So maybe what the Nets need to do is cast, like to go back to this top of the show here on Pallet Rack City Inside the Paint, maybe what the Nets need to do is sort of what we talked about the Heat with Tyler Herro and those other teams. Maybe you cast Kyrie Irving as your Lou Williams, as your Jamal Crawford, as, hey, maybe we get 20 points in a row from this guy today. If not, we have our system, we have our lineup, we have our rotation. He becomes that kind of player, because you know what, Clay? I think you'd agree. If you were to go through streak scorers in the NBA, players in recent years who single-handedly have scored 10, 12, 14 points in a row for their team, Kyrie's a player who's on that list. So maybe that's the way that you wind up casting him this season. Or maybe he just gets the shot like Andrew Wiggins did and just realize, hey, it's a lot of money.
Yeah, and that would obviously be the game changer. The next thing as we go on, I'm not going to sit here to try to be an epidemiologist or a doctor or whatever. But the one thing that I think we've all experienced being just living in this is that the second that we think we know what's going on with this virus, the compass changes very quickly, and we all have to adjust.
And look at Andrew Wiggins. You have a player there who said he wanted a religious exemption, that he just wouldn't do it, and all of a sudden, not to quote a song or something, but he lost his religion. All of a sudden he realized that paychecks were real. He hasn't built up the equity in his bank account that Kyrie Irving has. So it winds up being a little bit different for him. So maybe Kyrie comes around, and I think you'll see a Bradley Beal come around and other people come around. Look, we're seeing a very hard line drawn here. We've seen what happened at ESPN with Sage Steele and her comments on this. I think we're coming closer to a consensus. You are blessed to be able to be an NBA player. You are blessed to be a Kyrie Irving and earn $200,000 to $300,000 a game. And part of that might be conforming, even if you're a non-conformist. So I think that's what happens in this situation. I don't think this festers as long as people think. I don't. But Clay, you were spot on at the top of the segment. If there is one player in the NBA who would push this to the max, it probably is Kyrie Irving.
Chris Adams says by the way, thanks for the super chat. That's great. The only reason the Nets stay at number 2, and it's because Kyrie Irving isn't on another team in the East. If he was on another team in the East, then what? I mean, absolutely. Like hypothetically, if Kyrie were to come to the Miami Heat, all of a sudden you have that volume score.
Or Clay, I'll give you another one. Or let's say people are talking about a Ben Simmons for Kyrie Irving swap, which is fascinating on the level. Usually 2 contenders don't make a trade like that. It is doable. There aren't the same restrictions in Pennsylvania, so he could be a full-time player and not have to worry about that. He would have the NBA's onerous restrictions of being unvaccinated, not being in the same locker room, not sitting with teammates at meals and on the flight. But that is something that is doable. There is a deal out there. So here's the problem, or here's the question. Everyone keeps thinking COVID is in the moment. We thought the end of 2 seasons ago in the bubble would be it. Then we go through all of last season with the restrictions and a shorter schedule. Then we get to the start of this season with vaccination requirements. So do you give up on your Nets big 3 for the long run because of what's happening right now with Kyrie? Or do you look at it another way? Kevin Durant's getting older. James Harden is getting older. This is your window. And so maybe half the season with Kyrie and half the playoff games with Kyrie is still the better alternative than waiting for a year for either COVID to go away, the restrictions to go away, the pandemic to vanish. That's the fascinating thing. Is there a Brooklyn Nets long game? I don't think there is. If there's a long game, you're not adding Blake Griffin. You're not adding LaMarcus Aldridge. You're living in the moment. So that's what makes this so fascinating. Do you trade someone away because he's being obstinate in the moment? Or do you take a little bit of a longer view to it? I think the Sixers would do Ben Simmons for Kyrie Irving. I might be wrong. Maybe you don't want to go one headache for another. You've already dealt with your share of headaches. But man, Kyrie is talented.
Oh yeah, and you're willing to deal with that for somebody of his caliber. I would say this: it's still a players' league. If I'm Sean Marks, if I'm Steve Nash, I am sitting down. I am setting a meeting right now with Kevin Durant and James Harden. First, I'm gonna go directly to Kyrie, and I'm gonna say, look, we got to know what the situation is. We have to know what you're willing to do. And if you're not willing to get vaccinated, that's your choice. We have to move forward knowing what your stance is on this and make the best decision for us. Then you sit down with Kevin Durant and James Harden and you say, all right, look, guys, this is what we're going to have to deal with. This is the best case scenario for Kyrie Irving with this team. He is with the team part-time for now. And when I say part-time, I mean a very small part-time. And then potentially at the end of the year, we get him back full-time. How do you feel about keeping him on the roster in that role? And would you rather try to get something for him that can supplement you guys and the rest of this team right now? Because if we were to turn around and trade him right now, we could get somebody like potentially a Ben Simmons. Would you? So I think this is one of those rare situations where you have to sit down and allow your other players to have a voice in this, especially the 2 players that you paid a lot of money to and who, look, even if you get Kyrie Irving, he's immensely talented. He's still your 3rd best player. I mean, James Harden. So to me, you have to sit down with your 2 best players and get their feeling on that.
And I can have this conversation a lot easier because I'm dealing with Clay Ferraro and not Clay Travis. But I would put it this way: this could end at any moment. He can get vaccinated at any moment. So that's the thing, Clay. This is so different. This is not a player who has a torn ACL, but it might be healed tomorrow. Usually an injury or a situation, a hatred of a teammate, locker room fighting, James Harden being obstinate last season at the start of the season in Houston, Jimmy Butler sabotaging practice in Minnesota. That's not going away immediately. All it takes is one poke, one pinch, one shot, and Kyrie Irving is totally back on board. So that's the thing. I think what you have to do, as much as talking to James Harden, as much as talking to Kevin Durant, is, and I know this might be the hardest thing in all of sports, is getting a read on Kyrie Irving. Is this going to end tomorrow, the next day, over the weekend, next week, during the preseason? Because then it all goes away. So that's the thing, is whether you're talking to Kyrie's people, whether you're talking to Kyrie, whether you're talking to a shaman, whatever it takes, I think that's what it comes down to. That's what makes this so unique, Clay. It goes away in a millisecond. If he says that, it just takes some convincing. Who's the convincer? Is it Durant? Is it Harden? Is it his family? Is it his agent? Is it someone out there? Is it his advisor? So that's why you almost have to pull back. This is so unique because this is I don't want to say horrific situation, but this is a tenuous situation that in a heartbeat, maybe while we're on right here, maybe before people listen to this on the podcast version, it's resolved. That's how quickly this can change. Because of that, I think you have to be careful about making any drastic move.
And that's why the first thing you have to do is go directly to Kyrie Irving. And if you can't get directly to him, then you go to the person that can get to him immediately. And you say, look, people want to be treated like grown men. Go to him like a grown man and say, look, we respect your stance on this, but we have to know right now, are you at all willing to get this done? And if the answer is no, you have your answer. And then you go to James Harden and Kevin Durant. And then look, maybe in that scenario, maybe then Kevin Durant puts in a phone call to Kyrie, because we know that they obviously came together to go to Brooklyn. Maybe he's the one. But you go to Kyrie first. You treat him like a grown man, and then you go to James Harden and Kevin
here
Durant.
On the way out, for people who used to watch the old series Oz on HBO, or you have someone accidentally bump into Kyrie Irving with a needle, give him an injection, he doesn't even know it, and then all of a sudden you go to Sean Marks, hey, he's vaccinated, it's all good. So maybe there's just an accidental poke where he goes, oh, I think I got stung, someone hit me there, and they're done. Not recommending that, not talking about the ethics. I'll leave that to Clay Travis, to Sage Steele, but so there is plan B also there. So it's going to be an interesting week.
Guys, thank you for all your comments in the chat. This was a great one. I think it's fun. It's fun to have the energy. It's fun to have the games back. Ira's going to be full of energy because he's going to drink a lot of coffee to get on that flight to Houston and take the red eye back. But guys, thanks for hanging out. This has been a blast. We'll see you next week right here on Inside the Paint.
Thank you.